Let's all pay respect to the Triple Gem as well as Bhante.
I think we'll all start together, shall we, paying respects and doing some chanting.
Okay.
Yes? Okay, great.
Currently in Penrith, 19 degrees and partly cloudy.
Which is good to know. Okay, let us begin with 3 bows. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Itipiso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vichacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhamma sarati sattha deva manusanang buddho bhagavati. Swakato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko akaliko ehipassiko opanahiko pachatang veditabo vinyuhiti. Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Ujjupatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Nyayapatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Samicipatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Yadidam chattari purisa yugani atta purisa pugala esa bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Ahuneyo pahuneyo dakineyo anjali karaniyo Anuttarang punya ketang lokasati. Very good. Nice to start off with some chanting. And now is some time for some meditation. I'm just going to adjust this. So hopefully you can all hear me. Yeah, okay, good. So we're all experienced meditators. And I think the people at home online are also probably quite experienced. So we don't need too much instruction. But one thing I just want to say in regards to the theme of the talk tonight, I always like to link the practice of meditation to the theme that we'll be exploring. So the theme of this talk is the importance of being wrong. So when it comes to our meditation practice, are you sure? Do you know what you're doing? Does it matter? Maybe, maybe not. Is it good, bad, who knows? Or are you expecting a certain result in your meditation? Do you sit down and expect the same result as normal? You sit down, you think you know what's going to happen in your practice. You have an expectation in your mind. No expectation. Very good. Because meditation can be this wonderful space where we don't know what's going to happen, where we see the changes of the mind, where there's some uncertainty. And that's a good thing, because we're not looking for experiences that we've had before. We're not going to cling to our past meditation experiences. We're not craving experiences way off in the future, enlightenment stages. Instead, we're just going to accept whatever comes. And that means we don't know what's going to come. And so meditation really is this beautiful space of unknowing, where we, through the practice, start to develop some clarity so that we can see more clearly. And seeing more clearly, we have a better idea of what is actually going on. And when we know what's going on, when we start to see more clearly and understand, that's when we start to develop some wisdom in our practice. So this space of not knowing is actually a very fertile place for us to develop understanding, knowledge, wisdom. But if we enter into it with preconceptions, ideas from the past, hopes for the future, then we're missing out on this opportunity to explore uncertainty, not knowing. And this is why some schools of meditation, some Zen schools and Mahayana schools talk about this kind of original mind or a beginner's mind. That's something important, especially if we've been meditating for some time. We no longer have the mind of a beginner. We have the mind of an alleged expert. And so we think we know what's going on. We think we know what's going to happen. We think we know what we're doing. But sometimes when we change things around, mix things up, try something different, move our posture, move our position, change our meditation theme, then we start to see quite differently, because we break out of this habit the mind has gotten into, and we have embraced a new unknowing space. So that's a few ideas, approaches for tonight's meditation. We'll do about 25 minutes, and we'll just ease into it very gently by relaxing the body and relaxing the mind. So use this beginning moment to set up your posture. Sit comfortably. Have you found the right posture, or are you in the wrong posture? Maybe another posture is better for you today. And so we begin just by letting go of the day, letting go of all the busyness and the activity of our day, letting go of the world outside, beyond this room. leaving it all behind in the past. After all, there's nothing we can do about those things past. And so for the time being, just letting go, leaving them where they belong in the past. And not worrying, thinking, planning the future. Future is so uncertain, so unknown. And so instead, not being in the past, not worrying about the future, we can be here. We can be now. We can be aware and relax. So we relax down through the body, releasing any tension, any tightness in the face, softening the whole face, relaxing the jaw, letting go of any tension in the neck, shoulders. Allow the arms to relax. Softening down through the arms, any tension, tightness, draining away through the fingers. And coming to the back of the body, releasing, letting go of any tension in the muscles, softening through the upper back, relaxing the spine, softening middle back, relaxing the spine. And coming to the lower back, relaxing, softening. And now coming to the front of the body. Feeling all the bones, all the muscles, chest, releasing. Even the lungs, even the heart, softening, relaxing down through the abdomen, deep into the internal organs, relaxing there, and drawing the relaxation down through the hips, letting go of tension in the buttocks, releasing the thighs, relaxing the knees, softening the shins. Any tension, any tightness drains away through the toes. now the body feels soft, relaxed. Where tension and tightness was there previously, now there's comfort, a sense of ease that comes from letting go. And you notice that when the body is relaxed, the mind naturally, all by itself, becoming calm and peaceful. And when the mind is peaceful, calm, awareness, mindfulness naturally appears all by itself. You can use this mindfulness to explore the breath, explore the body, or just enjoy this calm, quiet, peaceful mind. Enjoying this space, unknowing that it's here now. It's a practice in whatever way the rest of the meditation. So as we come towards the end, short session, reflecting, looking back over the meditation, asking yourself, how was that? Were you able to relax? Did you find some peace? What experiences did you have? Was there something new you hadn't seen before? Just reflecting, inquiring, understanding your practice. Having done something good, we can dedicate merits of our practice, thinking, may all beings come out of ignorance. May all beings be released from suffering. May all beings be happy. And when you're ready, gently opening the eyes, perhaps having a wriggle or a stretch if you need. So thank you to the Association of Engaged Buddhists for inviting me to give this talk tonight. It's very good to see some old friends in real life. I'm so used to seeing people on TV, as I like to think of it now. So it's really good to be back with the humans and also our friends who are also human, but on TV. It's very good to see you all and be here with you. And this talk is called The Importance of Being Wrong, which is a good thing because it's a talk I can't really go wrong with. It's a talk I'm eminently qualified to give, having been wrong many times in my life. But I did notice that when I talked to some friends about this subject, they said, oh, my partner should come to that. And I thought that was very telling, because usually it's other people who are wrong. Rarely it's us. I live with Bhante Akāliko, who you all know. So he's a polymath. He's an expert in many different things. And he's been a monk a very long time. Very good teacher, he's very knowledgeable. And so once in a while, I'm allowed to be correct. I said to Bhante, I said, I'm usually correct maybe once a month or so. Is that right? And he said, yes, but now you've used up your allocation for the month. But this talk was actually inspired by looking at some internet arahants. Everyone knows what an arahant is? It's a fully enlightened being. So they're not going to be very common in the world, as you can imagine. But if you look on YouTube, they're remarkably common. And there's many internet arahants. Some of them will be streaming their enlightenment live for your pleasure, for your viewing pleasure. Some of them will be recording their progress on their path, telling us how we can achieve the same results they've had. And I went on a deep dive into these internet arahants, and I thought, how sad, actually, how sad it is to be so sure of yourself. Because if you're certain that you've completed the work, completed the spiritual path, if you're certain, then there's nothing left to do. If you think you've finished, there's nothing left to do. So these people have cut off any possibility of progressing on the spiritual path. They're not arahants. You see the way they behave, the way they talk, the way they practice is not like an enlightened being. There's no resemblance to the enlightened beings we see in the suttas, and they'll say, oh yes, but that's not true, or that's not real, or this isn't like that, or they redefine the terms of what it means to be enlightened, or whatever. But regardless of their approach, they've cut themselves off from progression. And this is what happens when we think that we're right, when we think that we're perfect, that we can do no wrong. We actually lose an opportunity for growth. We lose an opportunity for change and development. Because everything we do is perfect, everything we do is right, we're correct, we're the ones who know. And other people don't know. And I'm right, you're wrong. Go save your doctrine. These are some ways of cutting off progress on the spiritual path. So it's important to understand how this happens, how we get to this point. Because even if we're not claiming to be an internet arahant, we all have this tendency in ourselves. We all have this view of ourselves as being someone who is correct, someone who is right, someone who knows, someone who is an expert in something. And this tendency is going to affect the way we approach our spiritual practice as well. The longer we've been practicing the spiritual path, the more danger there is for us. The more senior we are as a teacher or a practitioner, the more danger, because we think we know what we're doing. We think that we've progressed. We think we've made progress. We think we have, and perhaps we have. We've come a long way. Perhaps we have made remarkable changes. But have we made changes that are beneficial to us and beneficial to others? And sometimes when I meet people on the path, and they might have a very good intellectual understanding of meditation, Buddhism, an academic understanding, they might be right about all the scholarly stuff that you can throw at them. But they might still be rude to the bus driver. They might sit there and practice metta bhavana and say, may all beings be happy, and then go and yell at the waiter. So we have to be very careful when we look at ourselves and examine our spiritual practice to make sure that we still have an opportunity to be incorrect, to be wrong about ourselves, about our spiritual practice, to leave open the possibility, really, for progress, for moving forward. So even if we're not internet arahants, even if we're not scholars, we should still be aware of the quality of our relationships, because this is where most people are wrong or right. And I'm not really in this talk going to be exploring knowledge, omniscience, perfection, enlightenment. more I'm thinking about the kind of wrongness that comes from hurting ourselves and hurting others. Kind of wrongness which is pointed out to us, that is reflected back to us somehow, where someone says to us, you did this to me, and it hurt. And you respond, no, it didn't. I didn't do that. That's your fault. It's your problem. This is the kind of thing that I want to explore in this talk tonight, this the wrongness of our interactions of body, speech, and mind, and how we need to examine our thoughts, our actions, our speech in ways that allow for that opportunity for us to see how our actions can harm others, how our speech does harm others. Because when we are told you've hurt me, when we are told you harmed, there is a choice that we have. One choice is to admit our faults, apologize, promise not to do it again. Another choice is to not admit our fault, not admit wrongdoing. And I'll explore that in a few moments. But just to provide the contrast, for those internet arahants, I'm thinking of one particular person who has made a name for himself as an arahant. He calls himself an arahant. And people have said, maybe you're not enlightened. Maybe you're wrong. And he has never seen it that way himself. But then another story I heard of a man who thought that he was enlightened, a monk who thought that he was enlightened and told people that he was enlightened, set up a center, had lots of devotees, became very popular and successful, and then had some doubt and went to a teacher to ask for some further instruction and discovered that in fact he wasn't enlightened, wasn't perfected. So he had a choice. He could say, you're wrong, I'm right, or he could admit his faults, which would have been quite a difficult thing to do, yeah? He's already set himself up as an expert, as someone who was attained. But he did. He said to his community, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I'm going to close the center and I'm going to go work on my practice. And so this is a good kind of contrast between two different approaches for the same kind of issue. Even at the time of the Buddha, there were many people who thought that they were attained, many people who thought they were enlightened. But the Buddha had to say to them, sorry, you're not. So if people who think they're enlightened can be wrong, maybe ordinary people like us who don't even think they're enlightened, maybe we can also have some faults and some qualities that could be worked on. I'm also just thinking of that classic image that sometimes we see of the Buddha when he was going through his ascetic practices. Spent many, many years starving himself, torturing his body. And there's a particular form called the fasting Buddha that you sometimes see as a sculpture. Have you ever seen that image? It's a very emaciated looking Buddha, all ribs, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks. And when he talks about this phase, several years he practiced in this way, sometimes eating just 1 grain of rice, practicing austerities and ascetic practices. And here he talks about how his eyes were like, these empty, dark pools without any gleam, any light in them, that you could kind of poke his stomach and feel the spine. And you can imagine after investing in so many years of this kind of practice, that to say, actually, you know what? I was wrong. this isn't the path. This isn't the way to practice. This is an extreme way to practice that doesn't have any benefit and doesn't lead to peace, doesn't lead to nibbana. You can imagine that that mind, or the mind of that person who believed he was an arahant, who admitted his faults, that mind is quite different to the mind of a person who is reluctant to admit their faults, reluctant to see that they might have flaws. So why is this, do you think, that there's these different types of viewing a self? One self is solid, fixed, permanent. The other type of self is fluid and flexible. Yeah, maybe I was wrong. Didn't work out. Maybe I wasn't right. Clinging to a view of the self is one of the problems. Clinging to any views. I'm reminded of the chieftain, Payasi. I don't know if you've encountered Payasi, the chieftain in the suttas. Digha Nikaya number 23. He was a very stubborn man. But he was a scientist. He was the chieftain of a tribe. He didn't believe in rebirth and he didn't believe in karma. And so this was his view. And he heard that a particular monk, Kumara Kassapa the prince, was coming to visit. And he thought, right, I'm going to go and make sure he doesn't try to convince those people that there's such a thing as rebirth or such a thing as karma. And so he goes off and he starts questioning and interrogating the monk. And the monk comes up with all of these various counterpoints to his arguments. And Payasi was a very interesting person. He was, like I say, a scientist. So he didn't believe in rebirth. He didn't believe in karma. So he did all of these crazy experiments to prove it. He was the chieftain of a tribe. So if there was a prisoner, a criminal, he would do things like enclose him in a pot and burn the pot, heat up the pot, and then quickly open it to see if they could see a soul escaping. Yeah. Or they would do things like he would say to people, oh, you've been a good person. If you die, then come back and tell me, did you go to heaven? Did you go to hell? And he's like, well, no one ever came to visit me, so there's no such thing as rebirth. He goes through all these scientific methods, which are all slightly flawed and all have a counter argument that Kassapa, the prince, the monk, he puts back to Payasi. And Payasi at one stage starts to say, yes, I know your arguments are sounding good, but I have this view. Everyone else knows my view. I'm not going to give it up. So it's out of stubbornness that he holds on to this view. Stubbornness, maybe a bit of spite. And then Kumara Kassapa gives an analogy, which is one of my favorite analogies from the suttas, because it's so potent and so simple and so striking. And it's the image of a swineherd. So a swineherd is someone who looks after swines, after pigs. And so this swineherd is walking through the village and he sees a pile of dung, dry dung. And this is something he realizes that he can feed to his pigs. So he thinks, great. So he collects in his robe, he collects all the dung, ties it in a bundle and puts it on his head. And off he walks, very happy. You know, he's found a whole pile of dung to feed his pigs. Wonderful. But then it starts to rain. So that pile of dung, which was dry, It's now becoming quite moist. Then it becomes quite sloppy. So you can imagine he's holding it on his head and this kind of oozing out of his robe, down his face, onto his fingertips. And people say to him, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm not crazy. You're crazy." And he says, "Can't you see this is good for my pigs?" And people are like, "Yeah, but maybe the situation has changed, you know." But he says, "I'm not going to put it down. I've been carrying it a long way." And this is how it is when we have something that we're attached to, something that we hold on to, that we cling to, whether it's a view or whether it's a sense of our self that we've been carrying with us. It's very difficult when we've been carrying something a long way to put it down. It's very difficult to say, this is no longer serving me. This is no longer of benefit. This is something that isn't good. To put that down. And so this is the problem we have as humans. We have this sense of self. We have this view of ourselves. And it's by holding on to this view, by holding on to this self, that we have suffering. So there's three main ways of looking at self in the Pali Canon. We have this idea of Sakaya Ditti, like an embodied view of self, believing that this is a permanent, stable self, that this self stays the same, all throughout all time, and that this self is perhaps something that is permanent, fixed. And this is called a wrong view by the Buddha. We can even just see through the form of our body, we grow up from the sperm and egg of our parents, the DNA of their parents, go back and back and back. And even in this life, this body of ours has changed so much. It's grown, it's transformed, it's aging, it's changing. And even our mind hasn't stayed the same. It's not fixed, it's not stable, it's not steady. In the Buddhist view, of course, this body, even this mind is part of something much bigger, part of a much bigger history that we have of self. We've had many bodies, we've had many minds. It's just this constant stream. This is one problem that we have, this sense of self as being me, mine, my. And how does this happen? It happens through ahankara, I-making, ego. We have this all the time. You look at your wardrobe one day and you think, oh, these clothes aren't me anymore. And you go out shopping and you're like, that's me. That's who I am now. That's who I want the world to see me as. Yeah. Or through things like status. Oh yes, I'm working at isn't that nice? So we build up a sense of self. We define ourselves through partners, through family, through jobs, through education, all these sorts of things, through robes, whatever. We make a self. Making all the time, remaking this self, on and on and on it goes. So there's this Sakaya Ditti, this view of us as being a permanent fixed self, as being a unique being. And then we have this I-making, this ego build-up. And then we have what's called mana, or conceit, kind of a view of ourselves. And this conceit is one of three kinds usually. It's the kind where we perhaps think we're better than other people, or the kind where we think that we're lesser than other people, or the kind of conceit where we think we're the same as other people. So these are the three conceits that the Buddha talked about. These are interesting to think about because we're not all the same, we're not better, we're not lesser. Then what are we? Well, we're just conditioned beings, and all of our experiences are different. All of our conditioning, all of our karma is what makes us who we think we are. And it's clinging to this sense of who we think we are that causes us problems. And so this is why the Buddha talks so much about anatta, this doctrine of not self. Buddha never said there is no such thing as a self. He said that was a wrong view. He never said that there is a self either. He said that's another wrong view. So we have at one end this idea of there being a self, permanent, fixed, stable self, and at the other end, this other extreme view is that there's nothing, just a bunch of processes, just DNA, just whatever. And then it's somewhere in the middle that we can understand that there is a conditioned self, that there is a being who does exist, but maybe not in the way that we think we do. And the reason that this is interesting is just to start thinking about what happens to this self when we're wrong. Who is it that is wrong? What happens if you have a strong sense of you, a strong sense of self, a strong sense of me, a fixed idea of me? What happens when you're wrong? It hurts. It causes suffering. Why? Because we've built up a view in our mind. And so when we experience the being wrong, how do we react? What do we do when we get in trouble? When someone says, "You hurt me," when we messed up at work, when we made a mistake? What happens? There's a range of reactions. Some of them are physiological. Maybe even we can, Dr. Enkong's in the room, maybe we can even see them in terms of those flight, fight, freeze responses. When we get called out for being hurtful or mean or rude, for making a mistake, for doing something that harms others, or even for not knowing something that we should, what happens? We might go into some of these modes. We might fight, become an attacker. Who do you think you are? I'm the one who's right. How do you go maybe Donald Trump on them and just start attacking? We can't allow ourselves to be wrong. So instead we go on the attack, we go fight. Sometimes we might want to run away, flight. We may even try to spin a story that says, "Oh, that wasn't me." We might lie. "I didn't do that. That didn't happen at all. You're wrong." We might just try to escape that situation, not confront it, not look at it, not accept it, but run away from it. We might go into a shame response. One of the things that happens when we're wrong is we start blushing. And scientists have wondered, why is this happening? Why do people blush? And they think it goes back way, 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 way back. Humans are social creatures. Being wrong in a group still had consequences for the group. And this was a way of showing wrongness in a group. So it's kind of interesting to think about. We also have all of these conditioned responses, feelings of, being inferior or guilty or compounded poor self-view. We remember perhaps or embody the memory of being wrong as a child. We associate being wrong with getting into trouble. We associate being wrong with a position of powerlessness. We're a child who didn't know our parents were right. As we grow up, we become teenagers, we start to challenge our parents' view, sometimes quite strongly. We start to assert our own authority, our own knowledge of being right. And then as adults, that certainty has become very strong. We're no longer children. When we get into trouble, it hurts. We're fragile. That sense of self that we've built up is not strong, it's fragile. And when it breaks, shatters to 1,000 pieces. And so we want to put it back together as quickly as we can. When we're being pointed out to that we've done something that harms or hurts, or when it's pointed out that we were wrong, we'll respond in certain ways that will quickly put that self back together. All of you will know people who, maybe your partner, maybe work colleagues, maybe teachers or students, someone in your life who you've had this interaction with in the past, yeah? Where you know how they'll respond if you say, oh, you did this thing the wrong way at work. You know how they'll respond, yeah? Because that's the very strong conditioning that they have. You see how they'll respond. Do you know how you respond when it's pointed out to you that you did something that caused harm, when you did something wrong? How do you respond? Do you deflect? Do you attack? Do you collapse into a pile of tears? Do you want to run away? Do you lie? Do you say, it's not true? How do you react? What was that? Yeah, you justify it. That's the usual one. Yeah, we will justify it. We'll say, oh no, it's because this. What we're doing is actually building up that sense of self again. Yeah, that sense of rightness, correctness, meanness, But actually, when that happens, we're missing an opportunity. Because if we do have flaws, if we do have faults, if we do have mistakes that we've made, it's much better to know about it than not know about it. If we can see our flaws, if we can see that our actions have consequences, that our speech can harm, that our bodily actions can cause trouble for others, if we can see that, then we have an opportunity for growth. But if we never look, we'll never learn. If, when our faults are pointed out to us, we don't listen, then it's willful ignorance. It's one thing to not know, to be ignorant, I mean, we're talking about delusion, ignorance in Buddhism. And how can you know what you don't know? Well, when it's pointed out to you, you have an opportunity to listen and to learn. And this is why the Buddha said that when someone points out your faults, you should pay attention as you would to someone who was showing you the way to treasure. So this is how the Buddha talked about faults, about being wrong. He didn't fix people as being bad or stupid or wrong. He knew that they have an opportunity for growth, but it's up to us to be open to that growth, to make amends, to understand how our actions cause harm, to see how our lack of knowledge causes suffering. It's up to us to do that. And in the monastic path, the Buddha gave many opportunities for this kind of growth. And so I'll share some of those with you because I think that there's some interesting models there. So the first thing is this concept of admonishment. Admonishment means kind of telling someone you've been naughty, you've been bad. And this is something that we do in the monastic path. This is something that is an annual affair after our 3-month rain retreat. We have what's called Pawarana. Many people celebrate Pawarana Day in Theravadan Buddhist culture, but not many people know what it's all about. So it's a time when the monks and nuns ask for forgiveness and they invite the Sangha to admonish them. So the first thing that's important here is, firstly, they've made themselves available. They've issued an invitation, Pawarana, invitation to be criticized. So that's quite revolutionary in a way, isn't it? Like, it's like asking for feedback. We don't often ask people for feedback outside of maybe like a work context, yeah? Do you go to your partner and say, do you have any feedback for me? If you do, I'm open to it. Danger, yeah? We don't want to know. Willful ignorance. Just ignore and pass the salt. Let's not talk about it. This is the way that we go through the world, which is a shame because it means that the people closest to us, the people who know us the best, the ones who are going to help us the most, we never invite them in to this. Why? Because we're afraid. We don't want to be hurt. They know us. They know us. And they're still with us. So that's pretty special, but we don't open ourselves up to invitations like that. So this is something that we can learn, perhaps, that there is an opportunity where we might invite others to say, let us know how we're doing. Could be good for us, if we're open to it. Of course, I wouldn't recommend just a free-for-all, where you just go around telling people what's wrong with them. It might be a little bit judgy. And it might be a little bit, maybe it might not be done with a pure heart. And the Buddha actually talked about this. He said, if you want to admonish someone, if you want to tell someone, what they've done, he said there's these 5 factors that you should have before you admonish another person. Some of you may have, I think Bhante Akāliko talked about these things a little while ago. So the first thing is you should be pretty pure in your bodily conduct, yeah, and in your speech. So you should be pretty perfected in these 2 things. You should have love in your heart, yeah, you should have metta, yeah. You should be very well learned in the Dhamma, and you should know the patimokkha's of both the monks and the nuns. This is, of course, he's talking to the monks and the nuns. So he's basically saying, you better be pretty high level if you want to go and criticize someone else. And you better know what you're talking about and understand the rules. If you're going to say, oh, you broke a rule, you better know the rules, yeah? So these are 5 things he said that you should have if you want to admonish someone. And then he said there's a further 5 factors you should consider. Is it the right time to admonish someone? You know, do you admonish them in front of everyone? Is it the right time? Or do you take them to a small room and have a private chat? Timing is important, yeah? Are they in the right space to receive your feedback? Maybe, maybe not. So check, is this the right time to admonish someone? The second thing is, are your words true? Do you have all the facts? Or is it just your opinion? Something to think about. Are you speaking harshly or gently? Sometimes we might need to admonish someone harshly if they don't respond to gentle admonishment. Is it going to be beneficial? Is it useful? Many people try to give them some feedback. Maybe they won't listen. Or maybe it's something really old, like is it useful to admonish someone for something they did 15 years ago? Is it useful? You're just going to drag up something. Maybe, sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be. And do you do this admonishment with a mind of love or with a secret maliciousness? So we have to be very aware of ourselves, is what the Buddha is saying. He wants us to understand that, you know, although this self that we've constructed is illusory, although this sense of self is deceptive, admonishment can still hurt, can still go wrong. So be very careful how we admonish. But the important thing in this conversation that we're having is this idea that we can allow other people to point out our faults if we're willing. And if they are careful and abide by these things that the Buddha talked about, then maybe it will be of benefit for us. The Buddha praised monks who are easy to admonish, because it's through this admonishment that we can grow. It's by understanding our actions, our speech, the consequences, that we can move forward on the spiritual path. And so by opening that sense of self a little bit to some feedback might be useful. Another thing that we do in the monastic path is atapi padidesana. This is the confessing of offenses. So many people don't know that there's confession in Buddhism. Most of the time when we associate the word confession with religion, we're thinking about the Christian religions and the absolution that is given by confessing to a priest. So this is an important distinction. When you confess in Buddhism, you're not getting divine grace. You're not getting any special favors. When we confess in Buddhism as monastics, if we've committed an offense, we're lightening ourselves. We're admitting our wrongness, and we're aspiring to not do it in the future. And so this is what we do. So we have a list of rules that we follow. If we break a rule, we feel bad. And because we feel bad, we want to lighten ourselves. And every 2 weeks, we have the Patimokkha on the Uposatha days, the new moons and the full moons. And so if we've committed an offense, we confess it. And we say, Bhante, Sambula Nanavatakai. We say, Bhante, I've committed many offenses of this type. And the other monk will say, Pasasyavusa, do you see? Yes, Bhante, I see. Well, you should be more restrained in the future. Yes, Bhante, I'll be more restrained. So this process is quite beautiful because it's almost like one of those classic modern day apologies, you know, that you see politicians do and media, people in the media. They admit the wrongdoing, they specify the action that they did. I have to specify the category of offense and how many times I did it. So they specify the offense, the wrongdoing, the particular specific instance, not just some vague, oh, I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings kind of thing, but I'm sorry that when I said this to you, you got upset. I understand because I said this, you felt this way. You acknowledge the specific, not just some vague, general kind of wrongness. And then you acknowledge that it causes harm. I realize that I hurt you. And then you say, I won't do it again in the future. So you make an aspiration to not engage in the same behavior that caused harm. So this is like the kind of perfect modern day apology, which obviously throughout history has precedence, even in Buddhism, perhaps, this idea that we can make amends. Because this is very important, that there's an opportunity for growth that comes through understanding how our behavior affects ourselves, how our behavior affects others. We need to understand that there is this opportunity. Otherwise, there's no hope for us. If we've done something wrong, we don't want to become stuck on that view of ourself as a bad person. This is just as bad as thinking that you're correct. It's still a very fixed view of yourself. So if you have this view that you're the correct one, the one who knows, the one who's always right, you're not going to learn. If you have this view that you're always wrong, that you're useless, you're stupid, and you cause a lot of harm, and you just deserve punishment, then that's also going to be a fixed view of yourself. That's also going to limit your potential for growth. Instead, we see the Buddha saying, this isn't you. This is just an action that you did. It doesn't define you. There is an opportunity for you to have growth. There is an opportunity for you to find a way in the future to not do the same thing as you did in the past, a way out of causing harm, a way out of causing suffering for yourself and others. This is important, yeah? Because this means that there is potential. It means that we don't have to accept where we are as the end. We don't have to accept that there's the past actions that we did will define us always in the future. This is why in Buddhism, punishment isn't something that really has a lot of importance. Because if you've been able to acknowledge your faults, and in the Buddhist monastic path at least, and also you see it in suttas where lay people admit they're wrong, in the Buddhist monastic path, if you've managed to confess and see your faults, then you're already halfway there to coming out of them. There are some offenses in the monastic path that do have some punishment attached to them, which I won't go into. But generally, the idea of punishment isn't endorsed by the Buddha. He says, lay down the rod, don't punish people. And that doesn't mean that our actions don't have consequences. It doesn't mean that just because we confess or just because we admit our fault doesn't mean that there shouldn't be and won't be consequences. The Buddha also taught karma. Just confessing doesn't reduce your karma. It helps you prevent making bad karma in the future through knowledge, through wisdom. It helps you come out of bad actions, bad behavior, unwholesome things. And when we do that, we have an opportunity. But if we can't see, or when we have it pointed out to us, we don't want to see, then there's no opportunity for that growth to occur. So there are consequences to our actions. But that doesn't mean that we are fixed, that there is no escape for us. And so I'm just looking at the time, so I think we're getting the hustle on. And I just want to finish, I think, by saying how easy it is to admit your faults. How easy it is to admit that you were wrong. And that it's actually a training that we can do. It's something that we can practice in our own safe space of our heart by acknowledging to ourselves, yeah, you know, I did cause harm. I did say something that was problematic. I'll try not to do it in the future, and I'll apologize to that person that I hurt. You can do that in your safe space in your heart. You can try asking your partner for some feedback on the relationship. You know, you can allow other people to help you grow on the path, but it's the being open to it that's the most important part. And for that, we need to look at our sense of self. And that sense of self, if it's small, confined, brittle, and solid, that kind of self is going to be very resistant to change, very resistant to growth. Kind of self which is expansive, which is buoyant, that's flexible and fluid, this kind of self-view is more useful. It can accommodate small actions, big actions, things that cause problems, things that cause harm, can be accommodated in this larger view, a mind that is big, a mind that is expansive, the kind of mind that we develop in meditation, the kind of mind that we develop in the Brahma-Viharas, or just the expansion of the view of a self that comes from meditation. This is the kind of mind that will allow us to accommodate those bad actions in a bigger context so that they don't have such a heavy effect. And when we see in this way, we're able to understand how to come out of unwholesome actions, cultivate wholesome actions, which will lead to our future happiness and lead to less suffering in our life, more happiness in our relationships, and more happiness in the future. And just to finish up with the image of Angulimala, the mass murderer who cut off people's fingers as mementos after he'd killed them and wore them as a necklace, a mass murderer who was admitted by the Buddha into the Sangha because he still had potential as a being to come out of harmful ways, to come out of hurtful speech, hurtful actions, and to eventually become an enlightened being. And so if there's hope for someone like that who could see the wrongness of their behaviors and make amends, then there's also hope for us. I don't think there's any mass murderers in the room, but so please, these are a few words on being wrong and the importance of admitting our faults. And I offer them to you. Hopefully they'll be of some use, and may they help you in your practice. Oh, we have some time for questions? Okay. Does anyone in the room have a question?
The compassion practice is
very beautiful, very good. How come Buddhism hasn't got that practice? I wish that sometimes people really have no way to kind of confess. They might know they've done something wrong, like, but there's no way that they can go to kind of like confess it, and then they carry it with them.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Buddha didn't really kind of institute a system like that for the lay community. I think when you look at it in the monastic context, it's about a group of people who have to have a shared sila, shared morality. And that's a really important thing for harmony. So if you're living with a bunch of people and there's someone over there doing this and people are like, hey, we're not supposed to do that, and they're like, I don't care, then it's going to cause disharmony. So it creates a sense of unity. But the one thing that the Buddha often, I guess, one thing that has come down to us and is a practice that you often see lay people doing at a retreat or on certain days of the year is to ask for forgiveness. And so they'll say, oh, please forgive me for any action of body, speech, and mind, intentional or unintentional, things like that. Sometimes people will come to us and they haven't even had an opportunity to do something that would cause offense. But the important thing is, and this is something that we can do for each other at any time, in any place, wherever we are, whoever we are, when someone asks us for forgiveness, in Buddhism, you forgive. If someone asks you for forgiveness, you forgive. And this is something that we can do. We can ask someone for forgiveness, if we've felt bad, if we've hurt them, and hopefully they'll forgive us. It's the right thing to do, to forgive, because then it's kind of like a ritual. It provides a stopping point. You can feel better about the things that you've done, and they can try to see you afresh. And so it's a way of seeing, not a fixed self, not a stuck permanent, entity, but something that is fluid, that is open to change and has potential.
Maybe we can have a forgiveness retreat.
Yes, yeah. But often the place that the forgiveness has to start is within ourselves. Yeah.
We have a question from Zoom. Richard says, thanks. I really like the idea of a fluid self. Do you think we need a strong sense of self, but being mindful of being wrong sometimes, to function in the normal world, but an ability to drop that sense of self in an enlightened world?
I think that there's a big question and has a long answer. But what I will say is that often in Buddhist circles, we have this complete rejection of self, this annihilation, if you will, of self. We're told there's no such thing as self, that it's all a mirage, it's an illusion, you don't exist. And so there's part of us that thinks, hang on a second, do I? I don't know. Do I? Perhaps I do. Like, I feel like I do. Maybe I don't know. And then there's some spiritual bypassing that can occur because people end up talking about this elevated sense of not self, but not understanding the everyday sense of self and only focusing on this ultimate and not allowing the complexities of the everyday. But there's many times in the Buddhist discourses where the Buddha encourages us to associate with a sense of self through things like acts of generosity or acts of kindness, acts of merit making. These are things that he says we should associate with because they're wholesome and good. And so when we do that, we're kind of like watering the flowers. And then when he says, don't do these actions, avoid those actions, it's like pulling out the weeds. So we need both of these things. We need to understand that we want to associate with the wholesome and that there's some something in the future that will benefit from us associating with the wholesome, that we will gain a karmic ripening of wholesome actions. So it's in self-interest that we engage in beautiful acts of kindness, of generosity. It's in self-interest. And it's in self-interest that we avoid harmful, unwholesome acts, because there's a future result that will be experienced. And so we want to avoid that future result. So in that sense, it's important to associate with these actions, with these attitudes, because there is someone in the future or now who will experience the results of our actions. So yeah, don't be afraid of meritorious actions, don't be afraid of generosity, of kindness, of love, meditation, all these things, because associating with those things is important. And understanding those aspects of ourselves that we don't want to look at, looking at those aspects of ourselves that are confronting and difficult, anger, hatred, greed, miserliness, selfishness, harshness, all of these things, looking at those things too and seeing them in ourselves is important, because we can learn to let them go, and we can understand that there is a self which, when those things are gone, is much better than a self with those things. When those things are in us, that is who we are, that is what we are. When those things are absent, then we are left only with beautiful things like love, kindness, generosity. And when we associate with that, then there's benefits for us and others.
Just one little thing, but thank you for the teaching, for the Dhamma. It was very helpful. It's just an observation, it's not a question. I learned much more from the meditations, what was a complete disaster, than even the first jhana. And I tell you why, because after a lot of disasters of the meditation, it was an opening to anatta. How come I failed? This mind was all over the place. I thought that mind was mine. And that happened 50 years ago. And ever since then, now I laugh about it when I fail still with the meditation, because it takes me to a deep insight.
Yeah, very good. I think that often when you meet Buddhists, they often have a much more open view of themselves. You know they don't fix themselves too strongly, and that's a good thing, because it just means that we have this ability to be open to new experiences, you know, to new ways of being. Yeah. And Colin, you have a point to make as well?
Thanks.
No. It's getting late. Feels very much past my bedtime, I have to say. So should we finish up?
So thank you all very much. Just pay respect to Bhante.
Let's pay respects to the Triple Gem.